how do we grapple with those huge figures in thought? The ones who completely change how we see things, but whose own lives are, well, messy, controversial.
It's a tough question, absolutely. And today we're diving deep into one of the biggest and maybe most perplexing examples, Martin Heidegger.
Right, a German philosopher, often called one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. But there's that huge shadow, isn't there? His connection to Nazism.
Exactly. So our goal here is to navigate that difficult terrain. We want to understand the core of his philosophy, which was genuinely groundbreaking.
And also unpack the facts, the unavoidable truths about his involvement with the Nazi Party. We're drawing everything directly from the sources you've provided us, this rich compilation of information on his life, his work, the whole controversy.
Yeah, this isn't about judging him from our standpoint today, but about really trying to get an informed understanding based on the evidence.
Okay, so where do we start? His beginnings.
Let's do that. Let's trace the path. He was born back in 1889, rural place called Maeskirch in Germany. Humble background. His father was a sexton, the church caretaker.
Raised Roman Catholic, I understand.
Yes. And he actually started training for the priesthood in 1909. Entered a Jesuit seminary.
But that didn't last long.
Incredibly brief. We're talking weeks. He was discharged, apparently, due to heart trouble.
Wow. Okay, so that's a major turning point right there. Priesthood out, philosophy in.
Pretty much. That moment seems to have completely redirected him. He dove headfirst into philosophy people like Franz Brentano, and especially Edmund Husserl. Husserl's logical investigations was huge for him.
And his early academic work?
He wrote theses on psychologism and the medieval philosopher Duns Scotus, supervised by Heinrich Rickert. He tried for a Catholic philosophy position, didn't get it.
Right, and he was an unsalaried lecturer for a bit. A private doesn't.
Exactly. And he even served briefly in World War I in a meteorological unit near the end. But the really key period professionally was after the war, 1919 to 1923.
What happened then?
He went back to the University of Freiburg as Edmund Husserl's assistant. Husserl, the guy who influenced him so much, was now his mentor, really championing his work.
So things started picking up pace, and then he moved to Marburg in 1923.
Yeah, University of Marburg. That's where he really started hammering out his central philosophical theme, this whole question of the meaning of being.
And he started attracting some pretty impressive students there too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Future stars, really. Hannah Arendt, Karl Lowith, Herbert Marcuse. Quite the circle.
And speaking of Hannah Arendt, there was the affair.
Yes,
Yeah.
That started in 1925. A 4-year affair with Arendt, who was his student, just 19 at the time.
It's striking, isn't it, that Arendt was Jewish? And Elizabeth Blockman, too, another woman he had a long relationship with.
It is, especially as you said, given his later political path, it raises a lot of questions.
And then, 1927, the big one, Being and Time.
Sign on Sight. Yeah, that book just exploded onto the scene. It wasn't just another academic work. It catapulted him into, well, the sources say, a position of international intellectual visibility.
A philosophical earthquake, as you put it earlier.
Pretty much, because in Being and Time, he's doing something radically different. Think about traditional philosophy. It often asks, why is there something rather than nothing?
Right, the big metaphysical question.
But Heidegger flips it. He asks, what does it even mean for something to be? He thought Western philosophy got totally sidetracked, treating being like some kind of ultimate thing, an entity out there.
Instead of
recognizing it as something we're intimately involved in, something we live, it's about our experience of existence.
Okay, so how does he get at that? This is where Dasein comes in, right?
Exactly. Dasein, it's his key term. And it's not just a synonym for human being, it's more specific. It refers to the unique way humans exist, the type of being we possess.
Being there. That's the literal meaning, isn't it?
Yes, being there. It emphasizes that we're always already situated in a world, engaged with it, understanding it in some basic way, even before we start philosophizing. It moves away from abstract consciousness towards concrete, everyday life.
And this Dasein is always being in the world.
Always. And that's a unified concept for him being in the world, not just being plus world.
Okay, explain the in. It's not like water in a glass.
No, not physical containment. It's more like being involved in something, engaged in it. Think of being in love or being in trouble, or maybe like residing or dwelling somewhere, deep involvement.
Fork example might help here.
Right, the fork example. So when you're eating, normally you just use the fork, right?
Right.
You don't analyze it. It's just there, ready for its purpose.
Seamlessly part of the activity.
Exactly. Heidegger calls that ready to hand, so hand in height. It's woven into what you're doing, almost invisible.
But then,
But then the fork breaks or bends, or it's the wrong tool for the job. Suddenly, you notice it. It becomes an object of attention, something you might examine.
It stands out.
Yes, that's present at hand, 4 hand in height. It's no longer just part of the flow, it's an object over there. This distinction shows our primary way of being isn't detached observation, but practical engagement.
Okay, that makes sense. And he builds on this with the existentialis.
Yes, the fundamental structures of Daseins being. First, there's understanding, Verstehen, but not intellectual understanding primarily.
More like know-how.
Exactly. Our basic ability to navigate the world, to use things, to project possibilities, to grasp meaning in a practical sense.
And attunement. That sounds emotional.
It is a Befindlichkeit. It's about how we always find ourselves already in a situation, in a certain mood, already affected by things, like being thrown into a world where things already matter, where there are opinions, stakes.
There's no perfect English word for it, they say.
Not really, no. It captures that sense of our situatedness, our moodedness.
And the third one, discourse.
Read. Discourse. This is how the world gets articulated for us, how it's structured into patterns of meaning we can recognize and communicate. It's actually what makes language, as we normally think of it, possible in the first place.
So understanding looks ahead. Attunement connects us to where we find ourselves. Discourse makes sense of it. How do they connect?
He pulls them together under the structure of care, or Sorge. For Heidegger, care is the fundamental constitution of Dasein. It's this unified structure of being ahead of itself, future understanding, already in the world, past attunement, and being amidst encountered things, present discourse.
It's our complete way of being engaged across time.
Precisely. Temporality is absolutely key to the structure of care.
Now, what about das Man, the they?
Right. So Heidegger stresses that Dasein isn't fundamentally isolated. We are always being with others, Mitsein. That's primordial, he says, even before being an individual self.
So das Man grows out of that.
Yes, Das Man is the sort of anonymous public way of being, the they self. It's how one typically acts, thinks, feels. We enjoy ourselves as they enjoy themselves. We read, see, and judge literature and art as they see and judge.
It's the pressure of conformity, the average everydayness.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
The dictatorship of they, he calls it. It levels things down, prescribes our possibilities. There's some debate about influences here, Dilthey's context versus Kierkegaard's focus on the individual.
And this leads naturally to authenticity, getting away from des Man.
Exactly. Eigentlichkeit, which literally means ownedness or being one's own. Authenticity for Heidegger is about taking ownership of your existence, your possibilities, your choices, rather than just going along with the crowd, with the they.
How does one achieve that, according to him? It sounds difficult.
Well, he suggests a few paths, or maybe moments that can lead towards it. Anxiety, angst, is one not fear of a specific thing, but this unsettling feeling that reveals our fundamental isolation and the groundlessness of the world.
That sounds intense.
It is. Another is confronting our finitude, our being towards death. Realizing that our time is limited forces us to think about how we are living it.
Facing mortality.
Yes. And third, there's the call of conscience, this quiet call from ourselves back to ourselves, reminding us of our potential for authenticity, revealing our guilt, not moral guilt necessarily, but a kind of debt we owe to ourselves to be authentic.
But this idea of authenticity changes later on.
It does. The term itself kind of disappears from his later work. It gets replaced or maybe transformed into this idea of Ereignis the event, or the appropriating event, which is more about how being itself happens, a cosmic play of revealing and concealing rather than individual self-ownership.
Okay, so that sounds like this famous turn in his thinking, de-care.
Yes, that's generally placed around 1930 or shortly after. The focus seems to shift from design, the individual human way of being, towards being itself, or sign, as he sometimes spelled it later, and its relationship with time.
How big a shift was it, really?
That's debated. Some see it as a major break. Others argue it's more of a change in emphasis, that many core ideas remain, just expressed in a new, sometimes even more obscure vocabulary. He retains a lot of the earlier framework, but reorients it.
So what was he focusing on after this turn?
He became deeply interested in the history of being. He wanted to trace how the understanding of what being means has changed throughout Western history from the ancient Greeks onwards.
Trying to get back to some original understanding.
Exactly. He felt the earliest Greek thinkers, like Parmenides and Heraclitus, had a more primordial experience of being that later got covered up, especially by Plato and Aristotle, who he believed falsified it by turning being into concepts or static presences. He wanted to retrieve that original insight. This leads towards what some call event ontology.
And language becomes even more important here.
Hugely important, crucial even. Remember how in being and time, language was sort of secondary to understanding?
Right.
In his later work, that changes dramatically. He starts talking about how certain basic words aren't just labels, they are world disclosive. They actually open up and structure our reality.
Which leads to that famous quote.
Language is the house of being.
Yeah.
It's not just a tool we use, it's the very medium in which being dwells and reveals itself to us.
He really pushed back against seeing language just as communication, didn't he?
Oh, completely. He saw that view as part of the problem of modern technology, flattening the world. He made this really provocative claim. It is language that speaks, not man. Man only speaks if they neatly correspond to language.
Wow. So we're participants in language, not its masters.
That's the implication. We listen to language, respond to it, rather than just wielding it.
And in this later period, he was also engaging deeply with other thinkers. Nietzsche, Hölderlin.
Yes, his lecture courses on Nietzsche are famous. He saw Nietzsche as the culmination, the endpoint of Western metaphysics, the tradition he was trying to overcome.
And Hölderlin, the poet.
Hölderlin was almost the opposite for him, a herald, someone pointing towards a different future way of thinking and being, someone whose insights hadn't really been heard yet, a prophetic voice.
It's interesting. Some scholars apparently see links between his idea of historical destiny and Marxist ideas of historical progression, millenarianism.
It's a controversial comparison, but yes. Some see a structural similarity in the idea of history moving towards a certain fulfillment or revelation, warning about the real danger of fanaticism inherent in such views.
Okay. This seems like the point where we have to turn to the most difficult part of his story, his involvement with the Nazi Party.
Yes. There's no avoiding it, and we need to be clear about the facts, based on the sources. He was elected rector of the University of Freiburg on April 21st, 1933.
And he joined the Nazi Party very soon after.
May 1st, 1933, just about 10 days later and only 3 months after Hitler had become chancellor. The sources describe him as an enthusiastic supporter during this period as rector.
And his inaugural address, the Rectoratsrede.
Delivered in a hall decked out with swastikas. In that speech, he explicitly supported the German Revolution and Adolf Hitler. It was a clear alignment.
But he resigned as rector less than a year later, in April 1934. Was that a break with Nazism?
Most historians argue no, not really. It seems to have been more about administrative frustrations, conflicts with Nazi officials over university policies, maybe feeling his vision for the university wasn't being implemented, not a principled stand against the regime itself.
And crucially, he remained a member of the Nazi Party.
Until 1945, yes, even after resigning the rectorship. Hans Sluga points out this sort of duality. Apparently, he stopped some anti-Semitic posters and book burnings on campus.
Okay.
But at the same time, he was signaling sympathy with the goals of the Nazi student leaders. It's complex, but the support was definitely there.
How did Heidegger himself explain it later?
In a reflection written in 1945, he framed it as an attempt to see something positive in the movement, something that might lead to a, quote, concentration on the Germans' Western historical essence. He admitted he genuinely believed that was possible back then.
And the relationship with Husserl during this time, his Jewish mentor.
That's a particularly painful episode. Husserl, who had done so much for Heidegger's career, he was suspended from the university by the regional Nazi Gauleiter in April 1933. Soon after, a national Reich law forced all Jewish professors out.
Did Heidegger, as rector, have a role in that?
He didn't initiate the firing. It was a national law, but he did implement it at Freiburg. And crucially, he broke off personal contact with Husserl.
And the dedication in being and time.
He removed it in the 1941 edition, just gone. Though it's fair to note it was restored in editions after the war.
Hannah Arendt's reaction was strong initially, wasn't it?
Very. She initially called him a potential murderer, blaming him partly for Husserl's decline, but she did later walk that back somewhat. Heidegger himself expressed regret later for not showing gratitude to Husserl in his final illness.
So even after stepping down as rector, his involvement didn't entirely cease.
No. He remained in the party. He joined the Academy for German Law's Committee for the Philosophy of Law. This group was involved in discussions related to Nazi legal theory, including things like the Nuremberg racial laws.
That's significant.
It is. And then there's the infamous 1935 lecture, later published as Introduction to Metaphysics.
The one with the line about the inner truth and greatness of the movement.
That's the one. He spoke of the inner truth and greatness of this movement. Later, when it was published, he added a parenthesis clarifying this referred to the encounter between planetary technology and modern humanity.
But that clarification wasn't in the original lecture.
No. Scholars checked the lecture notes. It seems very likely it was a post-war addition to try and reframe what he'd said in 1935, a way to distance the comment from direct endorsement of Nazism as such.
And there are accounts from people who met him later in the 30s.
Yes. Karl Lowith, his former student, met him in Rome in 1936. Lowith reported Heidegger was wearing a swastika pin and openly expressed his continued faith in Hitler. Lowith felt Heidegger explicitly linked his political support to his philosophy of history.
Did Heidegger subscribe to the biological racism of the Nazis?
He explicitly rejected biologically grounded racism. However, he substituted it with an emphasis on linguistic historical heritage and the destiny of the German Volk, which still obviously had strong nationalist and exclusionary implications.
So after the war ended, consequences.
Oh, yes. He was dismissed from his university position in 1945 by the French occupation authorities. Then the university's denazification committee banned him from teaching until 1951. He was officially classified as a Mitläufer, a fellow traveler, or sympathizer.
And there's that controversial lecture in 1949.
Yes, highly controversial. He made a comparison where he seemed to equate the industrialization of agriculture, the manufacture of hydrogen bombs, and the mechanized production of corpses in Nazi gas chambers and extermination camps.
See, equating those things.
The context was about the essence of modern technology reducing everything to standing reserve, but equating the Holocaust, even metaphorically, with agriculture caused understandable outrage. It seemed to trivialize the unique horror.
Yet, despite all this, he later met with Paul Celan, the poet and Holocaust survivor.
He did in 1967. Celan visited him. It's a complex and much discussed meeting.
And the Der Spiegel interview. That was a big public statement, right? But published after his death.
Exactly. Conducted in 1966, published in 1976. In it, he defended his actions during the rectorship, claiming he was trying to save the university from being completely politicized, trying to steer things from within. He claimed he changed his mind about Nazism in 1934.
And the inner truth and greatness line.
He claimed that was a kind of doublespeak, meant only for those who could truly understand, referring to the deeper issues of technology, not the Nazi Party itself.
But how credible were those defenses?
Well, the interviewers at the time didn't have access to a lot of the evidence we have now, like Lowith's account or details about the law committee, and his claim of a clean break in 1934 seems contradicted by his continued party membership and statements like the one to Lowith.
And then, much more recently, the Black Notebook surfaced.
Yes, De Schwarzenheft, published starting in 2014. These were his private philosophical notebooks, spanning decades from 1931 into the 1970s.
And they contained
Explicitly anti-Semitic passages,
Yeah.
really disturbing things. Talk about world Judaism being ungraspable and wielding influence behind the scenes.
specific examples.
He wrote things like, world Judaism doesn't need to get involved in military action while continuing to unfurl its influence, whereas we are left to sacrifice the best blood of the best of our people. And another entry suggests Jews promoted the kind of calculative thinking that was now being used against them, so they couldn't complain.
That's incredibly damning.
It caused a huge uproar, understandably. It reopened the whole debate about the connection between his philosophy and his anti-Semitism. Some scholars pointed to passages where he seemed to critique Husserl's philosophy as being limited by his Jewishness.
Though apparently there were also entries criticizing biological racism in the notebooks, too.
Yes, it's not monolithic. There are passages critical of the Nazis' crude biological racism.
Yeah.
But the presence of this clear philosophical anti-Semitism complicates his legacy profoundly.
Moving away from the political for a moment.
Yeah.
His personal life sounds quite complex, too. Married, but these other long relationships.
Yes. Married Elfriede Petri in 1917, they had 2 sons, though interestingly, the sources note that the second son, Hermann, was biologically the son of a family friend, Friedel Caesar, but Heidegger raised him as his own.
And he maintained connections with Elizabeth Blockman and Hannah Arendt.
Yes, throughout much of his life. Both women, as we noted, were Jewish. It adds another layer of complexity or perhaps contradiction to the picture. He clearly had a wide circle of friends and influenced many people personally as well as intellectually.
He died in 1976.
Yes, died in 76 and was buried back in his hometown, Meeskirch, with a Catholic service.
So summing up his influence, despite everything, it's massive, isn't it?
Undeniably, he's consistently ranked as one of the most significant, maybe the most significant philosopher of the 20th century. People like Richard Rorty, Simon Critchley, major figures acknowledge his huge impact.
Especially in France. Existentialism, deconstruction.
Hugely influential there. Sartre drew heavily on being and time for being and nothingness, even though Heidegger himself later distanced himself from Sartre's interpretation, saying it misunderstood Dasein.
He didn't like being called an existentialist.
Not really, no. He felt it focused too much on the human subject. And then there's Derrida and deconstruction. Derrida's engagement with Heidegger is absolutely fundamental to his own work.
And the influence pops up in surprising places today. AI, robotics.
Yeah, Hubert Dreyfus famously used Heidegger's ideas of being in the world and practical coping, ready to hand, to critique early approaches to artificial intelligence, arguing that intelligence isn't just symbol manipulation, but embodied know-how. It's influenced situated robotics, too.
And Steve Bannon. Really?
Apparently so. Bannon has mentioned Heidegger, possibly drawn to his critiques of modernity and technology, or maybe his ideas about historical destiny. It shows the odd range of his influence.
What about East Asian thought connections there?
There's definitely interest. He had direct contact with Japanese philosophers from the Kyoto School, and some scholars argue you can see unacknowledged echoes of Taoism or Zen Buddhism in his later ideas about letting be and language, and figures like Alexander Dugin in Russia also draw on him. It's wide-ranging.
Okay, but alongside the massive influence, there was also massive criticism from the very beginning, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even his mentor, Husserl, eventually felt Heidegger had reduced phenomenology to just philosophical anthropology, losing its rigor. And analytic philosophers like A.J. Ayer basically dismissed his work as unverifiable metaphysics.
Wasn't there a famous debate with Ernst Cassirer?
Yes, the Davos Disputation in 1929, a clash between Cassirer's neo-Kantian emphasis on rationality and symbolic forms, and Heidegger's focus on finitude, anxiety, and the pre-rational foundations of existence. Heidegger sort of won in the eyes of many observers at the time.
But the Anglo-American analytic tradition mostly rejected him.
Largely, yes. Logical positivists like Rudolf Carnap were scathing. Carnap accused him of creating an illusory ontology based on nonsensical pseudo-propositions. Bertrand Russell famously called him an obscurantist and said his language just ran riot. Obscure and meaningless, basically.
What about critiques from the left, the Frankfurt School?
They were also highly critical. Thinkers like Georg Lukács, Theodor Adorno, Jürgen Habermas, they associated his thought with irrationalism, criticized its lack of social critique, and saw dangerous political implications, linking it sometimes directly to his Nazis.
Are there specific criticisms? People felt he neglected certain things.
Yes, quite a few. Emmanuel Levinas, another former student, criticized him profoundly for neglecting ethics, the face-to-face encounter with the other. Merleau-Ponty felt he neglected the body. Lucy Irigaray criticized his lack of attention to sexual difference. Peter Sloterdijk argued he neglected the dimension of space. So lots of different angles of critique.
Wow. So we've really covered a lot of ground, from these incredibly deep, influential philosophical ideas, Dasein, being in the world, authenticity, the history of being, language.
Ideas that genuinely shifted the course of 20th century thought.
To the undeniable, deeply troubling reality of his actions and statements regarding Nazism and anti-Semitism. It's a lot to hold together.
It really is. His philosophy is profound, challenging, still resonates today. But his life, his choices, they cast a permanent, unavoidable shadow. You can't really talk about one without confronting the other.
So the final question really is, for you listening, given this incredible complexity, this mix of philosophical genius and profound ethical failure, how do you approach someone like Heidegger? Can you separate the thinker from the person, the philosophy from the life? Or are they inevitably tangled together? That's something to really ponder.